And we are live. It's 6 p.m. Pacific time here on Saturday. Normally I go live on Fridays at 5 o'clock. But when you have a guest, whether it's someone within the United States, someone over in the UK, you got to be a little bit more flexible. But my normal scheduled time, if you're watching on the replay, if you want to join on live, it's going to be 5 o'clock Pacific time on Fridays. So let's kick off with my standard introductory music. All right, so I've got a special guest on tonight, and I did something stupid. Hold on, I'll be right back. I had to get my whiskey ball. So it is hot here. We're in summertime. It's Ardbeg day, but I'm not in the mood for Ardbeg. I'm in the mood for something bourbon-esque and something high ABV and put it on an ice ball. So I've got my ice ball here. Got to drink a little bit. Anyway, so this topic for tonight, whiskey craft versus whiskey business. Not necessarily that there's an antithesis between the two, but sort of having a better understanding of both. And what has sparked this is complaints that I've heard, and I've heard this about the wine industry as well. People make certain complaints about small distilleries. A small distillery puts out something, it's super young. Oh, it's overly oaky. It needs more time. Oh, and $100, man, I can get a bottle from this other big distillery for $40. It's got more time or age on it. And you're complaining about the small distillery that is barely, rubbing two pennies together, that it owes money to the bank. And so there's this complaints about small. And then there's the big conglomerate, evil conglomerate distillery, the multi-international brand with all the investors and all that, and complaints of all that. But I always thought if people have a better understanding of what it takes to run wineries, chateaus, or distilleries, a little bit more behind the scenes, that you could have a little bit more of a balanced understanding. There's pros and cons to everything. There's strengths and weaknesses to everything. And to have a little bit more of a balanced understanding of both, the challenges that both have, the strengths and weaknesses that both have, that you would have a more sympathetic understanding of what distilleries are trying to do. So I'm scratching my head, who I'd like to have on here. What I would like to have is a committee of small producers and the big boys come on and have them give their 2 cents, but not exactly possible. I don't expect tonight to be the end of the conversation. I expect this to continue to be discussed, more thoughts, more ideas. Feel free to disagree. I'm going to bring on my guest here in just a second, Daniel Whittington. He can feel free to disagree. We can disagree. This is a conversation. This isn't a preaching of a message. I'm looking for insights for him because I think he has a really good insight into the business. And so enough chatter, enough yabbity yabba yab. Let me bring Daniel on. How you doing, man?
I'm good. So you caught me in mid mosquito kill.
It's one of the reminders why I'd rather live in California. Austin, Texas, nice place to visit, but maybe I don't want to live there. I don't know.
This is how we chase away the people who don't belong. We sick mosquitoes on them. Yeah.
Well, there's the weather, there's the humidity, there's the crazy storms and all the rest of it, and
yeah.
And now all the Californians are moving there, so why do I want to go there when the Californians are leaving?
There's probably more Californians here than there are in your town.
So I'm going to pour myself a little something. So I'm flying the colors, got the Crowded Barrel t-shirt on.
Nice.
This is the first bottle of Eleanor that I picked up from you guys a couple years ago.
Oh, which one is that?
This is the 6.2, 57.3%, age 44 months. And this was when I first met you guys. I've got another bottle that I picked up last time.
Very cool.
But what I'm going to pour here, this is the Texas Whiskey Festival blend.
Oh, 3 bourbon, the third one, or which one?
This is from 2019. 2019.
That was probably one of my favorite of the 3. I think that's Iron Root, Balcones, and Andalusia.
Yeah, there's a Bloody Butcher Corn from Iron Root. There's Purple something or other from Iron Root. There's the Balcones Mirador, and there is Andalusia Striker.
Yeah, no, that's a great one, and it's actually great on the rocks because it's so hefty. It holds its own all the way through. I am drinking Grayson which was blended by the licorices for Nico. Crap. What's Nico's last name? Martini? Anyway.
Martini?
I think it's Martini. My mind just went totally blank. And a
not
mosquito just tried to fly
correct it
off
in the
with
chat
my
later
Glen
on.
Cairn. So I caught it back, though.
So if you guys are ever in Texas, if you're ever down there in Austin, so this is the Eleanor. They're probably the mainstay brand, which changes a lot. You can taste it there in the tasting room with Richard Amaro.
It's always MGP. If you see the word Eleanor, it's always an MGP.
And then these are the Alliance Series special bottles. And if you buy 10 of them, they come with a magnifying glass so you can actually read the label.
Yeah, you need one. No, that's going to be more like a bagel shop. You get a little punch step. You get the 11th one free.
So the print is very, 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 very tight. This is bottled at 58% ABV.
That's funny.
Well, I have a hard enough time with regular labels, let alone these sort of micro labels on the micro bottles.
Yeah.
So tonight's topic, man, this smells awesome. So tonight's topic of craft, the whiskey craft versus the whiskey business, and the versus isn't necessarily that there's an antithesis. And of course, a lot of times we talk about craft whiskey, which is a non-legal term. It's like saying special reserve.
Yeah.
Proprietor's blend.
Who was it? It was Justice Potter Stewart or something like that. He said, we're talking about whether or not a film was pornography or something, and he said, I don't know how I would define that, but this, I know what it is when I see it, and this isn't it.
Right.
Right. So it's like, it's one of those, like, and that's been used since then. That was the 60s. That's been used since then to describe, like, I couldn't tell you what craft is, but I know it when I see it.
Right. Or taste it. Right.
And this isn't it. Right.
So Tom Marr dropped $50. Thank you very much, sir. Says, cheers, brothers. Thank you all for your bringing the whiskey community. I've learned so much from you over the years. Well, thank you very much. Much. Oh, by the way, so Daniel also, so I'm sure everybody knows Daniel. You don't really need an introduction. But so Daniel, Chancellor of the Wizard Academy, obviously one of the two dynamic duo of the Whiskey Tribe and the Whiskey Vault, and instructor there for the Whiskey Sommelier School. And of course, what's your official title for the Crowded Barrel?
Owner.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I do. Right now, Emma is really heading up all the distilling and in control of all the blending. So I'll get pulled in as she's wrapping something up to check on something, right? Just to make sure that we're on the right page. But inevitably, every time she finishes something, I'll pick it up and I'll take all my notes, and then I'll say, tell me what your notes say. And I'll look at mine, and she'll get all of mine plus some extra. And I'll go, all right, I'm out.
There you go. Cool.
I'm unnecessary here.
So, and then you also got a band back together, right?
I am. I'm back into recording music with my old band, the one that played with Aerosmith. We're scattered across the U.S., so we got 2 guys in California and 1 in Nashville, and me here in Austin. Yeah. So we've been kind of like flying in together, doing some things, going back, and then developing it. But yeah.
So if I play a real mean cowbell. So if you ever need a cowbell,
done. Just record it with your iPhone.
There you go.
Email it to me. We'll drop it in. Any rhythm, doesn't matter.
Especially if you're doing like covers for like Blue Oyster Cult, man. There we go. All righty. So I'm going to bring up sort of an overview, just sort of a general guide to the discussion where I want to go. We can go off anywhere. We can pick one subject and just spend our entire time just on that one particular part of it.
Yeah.
So this isn't, a handcuff discussion. It's just sort of a sparking discussion. I hope more and more people are going to talk about, and hopefully at least give a little bit of insight into a few things. So let me bring this up real quick. And this may be total BS on this. I may not know.
Don't backpedal. Just own that shit.
Yeah, just own it. Here we go. So the whiskey craft versus the whiskey business. So the first part and these are generalities, not and maybe extremes or stereotypes. So when you think of the whiskey craft, we think of family, locally owned. When we think of the whiskey business, we think of corporate owned, shareholders, foreign investors. When we think of this whiskey craft or craft whiskeys, we think of qualities being the number one concern. People, again, these are stereotypes. Whiskey business, we think about more profitability as number one. In whiskey craft, we think more in terms of branding and marketing is more word of mouth. It's more grassroots sort of an approach, whereas big business is commercials and advertising. In whiskey craft, we think of maximized quality over quantity, and where the big business, we think maximum profit without destroying the brand image. When with whiskey craft, we think about a sustainable business model, whereas whiskey business is more about expanding business model. Again, these are generalities. Whiskey craft, we think about appealing to the whiskey enthusiasts, so appealing to whiskey nerds. Big business is appealing to whiskey consumers, appeals to a mass market. Whiskey craft employs very few people, contribute to the local economy. Whiskey business employs many people, contributes to a national, maybe even more of a global economy. Whiskey craft may be lesser known outside the whiskey enthusiast circles, whereas the whiskey business globalizes the image of whiskey. And again, these are strengths and weaknesses or just generalities. Whiskey craft might be more advances creativity, craftsmanship, and experimentation. And then whiskey business advances the image of whiskey, forwarding a reputation as a desirable spirit. And then both of these have sort of pros and cons. So
hang on.
So let's sort of start.
Hang on. Erik. That was fucking amazing. That needs to be printed up and handed to every fucking craft distiller on the planet. Because what I see there is like on every one of those line items, a circle, and every distillery having a Venn diagram with like 5 to 10% indie foot over here to 90, and then on the next line, and you can easily go, okay, guys, know what you're trying to accomplish here, because if you want to do this, that takes XYZ, and you don't have it. So if this is your whole goal, it's going to change this, right? Or it's like, oh, just to use it to like, it almost reminds me of like estate planning, right? Where it's like, okay, let's sit down, look at everything you have and figure out like what you intend for things to be, as opposed to just running behind the train, holding on, trying to keep up and then continually having problems. But every one of those, there's no line there. There's two circles that sometimes overlap and eventually eclipse one another. Right. And that's beautiful.
And there's distilleries that are in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And
like dead middle.
How far do they go?
Depends on the product too. Like there's distilleries where it's like, okay, we have 10 products. We have 10 SKUs. These 2 are going to be aimed at business. These 8 are going to be aimed at enthusiasts. And honestly, freaking Ardbeg does that.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
10 business. You know, the core line, all the Scotch guys have core lineup business. But then they have, committee release, distillery only, everybody's doing both of everything on that list at some level.
Yeah. So as I said, so these are meant to be sort of stereotypes or the extremes of both. And realizing, as you just said, there can be a lot of overlap, and there can be distilleries that are sort of, they're getting bigger, and this is true about wineries as well, get larger and larger and larger. And there can be some pitfalls as you grow and the decisions you make. Yeah. So when we think, and this applies to music as well, which is another reason why I'm because as a musician.
Yeah, it does.
When you think about an artist or a craftsman, someone in their youth, they fell in love with the guitar or the piano or something like that, and it's all about the music. And maybe they have a dream of going really, really, really big and being on the big stage in front of thousands of people, whatever. But it starts off most of the time being about music. And particularly in the 70s and 80s, now there's a little bit more egalitarianism because you have the ability to put your own stuff out there on YouTube. And those. Right. So it's not, but whereas before, the only thing
Gatekeepers.
you had was to get a contract, get a record deal, and you basically sold your soul.
Yep. Yep. No, in the early days, you were literally owned by the studio because it was the Hollywood model.
Right. And you might not see a dime for 3 albums.
Yeah. Or more, or ever. You
Right.
literally might just get, at the early days, you get just paid a salary.
Right.
And that was it. You just were an employee.
So
and then eventually in the 50s, 60s, all of a sudden you had like, oh, okay, record deals, but you get a cut. Yeah.
Right. And so like Billy Joel had to tour under a different name and do clubs in order to pay bills. You know, we think how big Billy Joel is now.
Yep.
Leon Patella, Commodores, his first 3 albums, he didn't make any money off them. So this is
the one I always
really,
heard,
really
like
common.
Destiny's Child at the year, I think it's Destiny's Child. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But at one point, I think they declared bankruptcy at the end of the year. And it was the same year that they had the highest selling record for the year, period, bar none. And so they declared because that was just proof like they're not making that money.
So starting off, getting into music, getting into wine, getting into whiskey, you can have I call it a romantic notion. Artists they're not, generally speaking, they're not necessarily have business first on their mind.
Yeah.
They have the art, they have the art, and that's
true of all makers.
Yeah, and the emotion part of it, rather than the business side. And if they're not wise, they can really get took and really kind of get screwed over. Taylor Swift is probably one of the, I would say, exceptions. She's a really, really sharp, I guess, a young lady now. She's managed herself really, really well.
Yes. Now she's had to take, she's currently re-releasing all of her first albums that she couldn't get the rights back to. So the only way that she could take control of it was she's re-recording them all as covers.
Right. So I think, so she's doing a cover of her own music.
Yeah, and re-releasing it so that she has control over it and makes all the money off of it. So all she has to do is pay a cover royalty.
So in the craft, you know, when we have this general idea of what craft is, and we think it's small, family owned, and so forth. And, you know, I've heard winemakers say, look, I'm willing to live under a bridge as long as I can make the wine that I want to make. And that is why I'm not in the wine business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to compete with that.
I just like, no, that's
like, I don't want to live under a bridge.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that was a requirement.
So when I first started studying winemaking, and I went into it with beautiful wine countries and went into it with a sort of romantic notion. And then I started realizing the hard realities of what it takes. You know, it takes a large fortune to make a small fortune in the wine business, and got to understand. And I started seeing wineries get bought out and things not going so well. Say Constellation buying out Robert Mondavi. I was told you about this before we went live. Richard Sanford had the Rich Sanford Winery down there in Lompoc down Santa Barbara. He was the one who realized, hey, we have this valley that goes east-west and gets this only valley goes out to the ocean east-west in California. It would bring this coolness. It'd be an ideal place for Pinot Noir. He starts the winery with a mindset towards Pinot Noir, and he goes into partnership with the Tolado family, which produces 1/8 of all wine sold in the United States come from the Tolado family. And he realizes, sort of along the lines of what I just mapped out, is his mindset would be on that craft side.
Right.
Their mindset is on the other side. And so now, sadly, the winery that has his name on it, he doesn't own it. He left.
Yeah.
And he started on the road.
It happens.
So when you think of craft distilleries, is other than what I sort of mapped out here, what else do you think comes to your mind in terms of what's a craft distillery?
Man, I think you just hit everything. I don't think there's any outliers. I'm still amazed by that list. I'm still having a hard time focusing. I'm still thinking about that list and how I'm going to be incorporating that in Whiskey Level 1 now.
Oh, there you go. Just put Erik Wait's name on it.
Totally.
Trademark by Erik Wait. As if I've ever had original thought about anything. So what do you think in terms of Now, obviously, you guys are small, and you have small distillery. So, what do you think is the sweat of the brow, day in day out concerns? What keeps small distilleries up at night?
Man,
Start small, finish.
surviving. I mean, literally just keeping up. You start running the numbers on how much whiskey in bottles you actually need to sell to start growing and cover some of these things. And then you start working backwards from there and realizing how many runs that's going to take, and how every run takes 6 to 10 hours, and how many hours that means in a week. I mean, and you just keep working backwards, and then all the other steps of like, shit, okay, we need to bottle 1,000 bottles to release it to this distributor. That's small potatoes when scattered across the entire retail market. But that takes 3 of us a day and a half to 2 days to do. And if that's all we're doing, and then no one's making whiskey, and you know what I mean? It's just this, at least that's my guess. It's just literally keeping up. And that's assuming that people are buying things.
Right.
So that's really step 2. Like, if no one's buying anything, your first step is making a whole bunch of whiskey and trying to figure out, how do I convince people to buy this?
but even in terms of, so your name's gotten out there. You got a good write up in a whiskey magazine, as Ironwood has. But then there is, hey, when can we get this in Canada? When can we get this here? When can we this? Next thing you know, demand is outweighing supply, and you can start to go, how do you?
That's when you get people thinking money and growth will solve this problem. We need to find somebody with money, without thinking through what happens when you bring in other people's opinions, especially when their money is involved. Right. And then you've got the classic origin of Balcones story: growth, kicking ass, and then investors, and then, you know, Tate not liking that he wasn't allowed to take someone's money, but then not listen to what they wanted.
and that's right? And that's exactly what happened with Robert Mondavi Winery. It was all family owned. They're expanding, being quite global in their assets and buying up other wineries and so forth around the world, expanding the brand. And then they went public. Mm-hmm. And now they had to dance to the tune of the investors. Mm-hmm. And in my personal opinion, I think they overexpanded. They spread themselves too thin, lost control, quality control. Their ratings started actually going down with the Wine Spectator. And the consequence is they had Constellation, which is a huge company, came on and offered them a buyout. And I was a stockholder. I bought in at 22. They bought us out at $60 a share. Not that I had a lot of shares, but right. But then they lost their entire family, their heritage, and essentially their own name. Mm-hmm. That's on the winery. It's a very, 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 very sad story. And the next thing said, as soon as they actually changed the ownership, the quality improved. They actually start producing better wines because someone else had a better handle on.
So there are two things. That pop into my head that I want to cover at some point, and they are the contrasting attacks on these deals. So first, let's just state right out of the bat, your list is fucking amazing, but nobody can define craft. That's the closest I've ever seen it gone for, like, giving you a good handle on maybe deciding whether something is craft, but there's no such thing as defining craft. I mean, look, Balcones is owned effectively by investors, but I would still call Balcones craft. Right. TX, Firestone Robertson here in Texas, bought by Pernod Ricard, you know, but I would still call Firestone Robertson craft, right? Hudson, Tuttletown, up in New York, right? The founding New York distillery, craft distillery, owned by William Grant and Sons. I would still call Hudson craft, right? So that's those fall clearly in the right-hand column of business, but I would still call the distillery. So that's just this gray.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So when you start talking about things, we always say this in the school, but most disagreements are not true disagreements. They're a disagreement over the definition of a term. So in the
Right.
sense, like when you say, I hate this, and you say, well, I like it. And then you say, well, what do you mean by that? And you get clarity. Then you realize more often than not, you're actually on the same side.
And there's different
Right.
angles and perspectives.
Well, but so I'm saying, like, if I said, like, oh, I hate wine guys. And then you're like, well, I'm a wine guy. And then I'm, oh, well, not you. Right. I mean, I like you. And it's like, well, okay, well, I definitely am a wine guy, but you like me. So let's define what you mean by wine guy, because I
Right.
also hate that. So when I hear somebody say something like, and what I'll say is like, oh, I hate those guys who just think wine is the only thing that matters and there's no other spirit or beverage that's alcoholic that can measure up or can have any kind of complexity other than wine. And it's like, well, yeah, I hate those guys too. It's like, okay,
Right.
then we agree, right? Now, when it comes to craft, when I hear people going like, oh, I hate craft, it's like, well, hold on. What do you mean when you say I hate craft? Like what? And like, oh, that like aged too fast and released too young and a lot of green notes. And it's like, well, yeah, I also hate that. That's just called bad whiskey.
Right.
But that's not necessarily craft, right?
Right.
So I think that happens a lot. And I think the other thing that's kind of I want to just throw out there as we keep continuing is very rarely, and so far I have yet to meet one. I'm sure they're out there, but even in the biggest brands on the planet for whiskey, you're not ever going to find anybody working making that stuff who doesn't give a shit and just is like clocking in, doesn't give a fuck, and they don't care what it tastes like, and like blah, they don't, they don't give a shit about quality. No, that it just doesn't happen. When you meet the guys putting behind Macallan who are blending and making stuff, they're as serious about what they're doing as any craft guy you've ever met in your entire life. Now, they answer to some people that they may have to make decisions periodically about stuff they don't want to do, but they have to for scale or for like there was in Arroyo Grande, California. There was one of the best burger joints you'll ever go to in your life, and it was called the Village Grill. And it was in like the downtown AG, like the little village, And I was hanging out with a friend who drove trucks for like meat delivery and stuff like that. And he was like, did you know Village Grill was like the size of my living room? It was tiny, right? Did you know that Village Grill has the highest quality of meat of anybody in like a 300-mile radius? Like there's a McClintock's Steakhouse in Shell Beach, just down the road, has less quality meat than Village Grill that they grind up and use to make burgers.
Wow.
And I was like, how is that possible? Did they know somebody? And he said, no, here's what happens. The quality goes like a pyramid in meat products, right? If you get the best possible thing you can freaking get, there's only a little bit of it, right? Well, McClintock's needs to serve 1,000 people in the next week. They can't select this because then one steak's going to be fucking amazing and the next one's going to be not as good, but they'll know because they can A/B compare. What they need is the highest quality meat right at where they meet their demand. Right. So that's like 2 levels down. Now it's still higher quality than you can get at like a grocery store, but it's not the top of the pyramid. Right. And that's what you find with the big guys is not that they don't care about quality. It's that they're having to make a decision for like, okay, we can make this. How many bottles would it make? 400. No. If we don't release something that has at least 10,000 bottles, and that's small, by the way, then we can't do it. That's a committee release, right? No, we need, it's Ardbeg 10. Okay, we need like 300,000 bottles. I'm just making numbers up. It's like, okay, so then we need to go down to, does that make sense?
Right. And I think this is what more people need to understand, because some people, I think they just go, They just look at this bottle, they smell it and taste it, and make a judgment without understanding the context. Cameron over at Drums and Dram, another drummer in the whiskey tuber world. Are you familiar with him?
No, wait. Is he friends with Whiskey and the Six? There was a musician guy that I can't remember his name. He was friends with Whiskey and the Six in Canada.
No, that's another guy. He does gins. That guy does gin.
Oh, okay.
So this guy's in Ohio.
Yeah.
He lives really close to Jason over at the Mash and Drum, and he's a professional percussionist. That's what he does for a living. He's a fairly new channel, probably around 1,100 subscribers around there. He's gonna go. He's doing some great stuff. Anyway, but he recently did a video, and he was talking about context and his approach to judging whiskey and judging in context. And I was like, amen, exactly what he's talking about. And so as a consumer, so I have a whiskey here from a very small distillery in California, and I want to root for California. I want to see California produce better whiskeys than Texas. Okay. And I haven't found any yet.
Good luck.
I haven't found it yet. And I buy a bottle from a particular distillery, and I just go, oh man. It's like someone took some alcohol and they took some, like when I took a lot of wood shop in high school, and you take a planer, and you go, and you get that peel of wood coming off the hand planer. Take that, dip it in alcohol, and that's what this bourbon is like.
Oh God.
And I feel so bad, and as someone who reviews whiskeys, I feel so bad dumping on them and stuff, but I got to tell it like it is. I got to tell it like it is.
So many of the distilleries that I've stumbled onto in California are in a hurry. That's what I can't figure out.
Okay, but
so many of them, they're in a hurry.
Okay, but real estate is so expensive. They're in Sonoma. Real estate is unbelievably expensive. They don't have the warehouse. Where are they going to store it? They got bills to pay, so they put it out there when it's too early.
That's why they move and hang out with us in Texas, where they can buy cheaper real estate and buy some time.
So like Dan Garrison is a rarity where he didn't need to get a quick turnaround. He could be patient and wait. And he didn't. So Tom R had mentioned earlier, a lot of craft new distilleries, when they start up, they're sourcing, they're doing MGP until their own stock gets some age to it, which is a whole nother discussion. But I'm sympathetic to him, but at the same time I also can't give him a thumbs up and endorse him either. And so I'm kind of in the mode, but at least I have an understanding where, okay, they're new, they're young. Let's check in a couple of years and see how they're doing. And see if, or are they still following the same model they're doing before? And really, I just thought, hey, dudes, need to try making gin, try making some vodka, and let that stuff age, or fake it, put some lipstick on the pig, and do a finishing. Spend a little time in a port cask or a PX cask. Do something like that with it. To cover that up.
I wonder if it would be better to see more wine guys getting into whiskey on the same property, so that the money concerns are dropped, right? And because then you've got lowered money concerns, palate, like you've already been training for palate. Who knows?
I think some of those who did really, really well at small wineries, they made their money doing something else. I can drive through the Silverado Trail, and I can tell you where they made their money before they started that winery. They did. So there's those who, we're a third generation winery. We've been here since the 1800s. And then there's those that, no, they made their money in the .com or medical doctors. There's a lot of medical doctors in the wine business.
Bought a vineyard.
Something else, and then that's how they got into that. So the funny thing about that if you in defining craft is if it became a really big buzzword, the big guys would start putting it on their label because it's a buzzword that people are gonna craft. I want that, and then grab that. So it's better off as a concept that's not necessarily become a buzzword.
Yeah, handcrafted. What was the there was something that popped in my head when you were saying that about trying to. Nope, it's gone.
Okay, let me bring this up real quick. So quality versus profitability, and there's almost, and we're not necessarily going to have time to go all these point for point, but there's almost this attitude of some people like, oh, all they care about is money. All they care about is the profit, and they don't care. Oh, it's the conglomerate. It's the and this almost as I think this Illuminati conspiracy
Right
behind it, or that profit is somehow a bad thing. Oh, and I heard in the music industry. So Metallica was a local band. I would see handmade posters on telephone poles when I was in high school. There was a cassette tape that before their first album that was going around. People were making copies of, bootleg tape. And then, and the guys were big Metallica fans. And years later, the guys I knew, oh, they sold out, man. They went commercial, excuse me if they don't want to, be living out of a bus, and, eating, canned tuna all the time. And they got kids that they want to be able to pay for their education. They got a mortgage to pay for it.
All it means that sold out is, a lot of people listen to them now. That's all that ever means, right? But I will tell you, and this is, I think, a direct correlation to whiskey. Something when I started out playing, it was in white vans and towing a trailer and clubs and small venues, and then it grew and grew and grew, and then we did our first tours with tour buses and theaters where it was like 3,000 to 5,000 people, and and I'll tell you that what we wrote changed dramatically after we got into the larger crowd venues. And it was because we would get out there and we would play our set of club stuff, and it would go over good. And then the guys after us would get on and play their big audience stuff. And it was like, oh yeah, right? And we realized we're not playing to the room, right? We're playing something that would be amazing in an intimate 100-person club where we could bring it down and bring it up. And you don't want to get too crazy because it's a small environment, or unless it's a party club. But then on a huge stage outdoor with massive speakers and a screen behind you, and you play like 3 or 4 intimate songs in a row, then the 5,000 people start getting bored. And so we started writing these songs that would just blow the doors off of the stadium. And all of a sudden, all of our shows got better and the responses got better. And then when we had to go back and play clubs again, we discovered it looked really pretentious to do on a 100-person stage what we were doing in a 5,000 to 10,000 stadium. Right?
So the music, so when I think of corporate music, obviously I've known musicians, they have their albums, and then they actually, to make the real money, they actually make jingles for commercials that nobody knows they're the ones making that music.
Right.
So they have their own bands, they have their music, but in order to pay the bills, they write jingles and tunes that nobody would know. Yeah, they're the actually ones who wrote that. Or so the big corporate, small musician comes up before. Here's the corporation. Here's the the guys give them a record deal. We need something with a hook. We need particularly in the 70s, because radio is not as relative today as it was before. It needs to fit this 3-minute format. It needs to have a hook. It needs to stick in people's mind. So people are going to be humming and thinking it. And so you'd write an album that has 1 or 2 songs for the radio that has that hook, that has that sound to it. And then the rest of it is a little bit more of, that's your deep cut 10 times before you go, oh, that's a really good song, but it didn't.
Yeah, but ironically, those earworms are the ones you give up on pretty quickly. But if you love the band, you'll never get tired of the deep album cuts.
Right.
It gets worse than that, man. When I was playing out of bands in Nashville, if you're in Nashville, you play either country or Christian music, were the 2 main. If you want to get paid, that changed after like Jack White went to Nashville and stuff, and things like that. But country or Christian music, And in the Christian radio, there was a term called JPM, Jesus per minute. You had to, how many times you had to, like, whether you put in the word Jesus in there enough into your song,
right,
determined whether or not this was only during a certain era, whether certain radio stations would even play it. And they'd say things like, "Oh, there's not enough JPM in this song." Like, oh, let me go back.
I could go down a whole nother rabbit. I could go down a whole nother rabbit trail on that topic, but I don't want to venture off on that one.
Yeah, no. But anyway, but the point is, with whiskey, you get the same thing, which is where, like, you start making stuff. Okay, like for us, we were releasing all those Eleanors. It's easy to get MGP. I mean, the list of MGP brands effectively on the shelf is astounding. And when we started, we had 12 barrels from MGP. That was the first thing we did. And so we were like, okay, well, let's just release these as single barrels. So we did.
But they were aged. But they spent some time in Texas, though, right?
Yeah. And actually, to caveat that, we had they were in Texas about a year to a year and a half while we were finishing our distillery, and right after we released them, some of them, the MGP reps, sales guys came through, and we poured them a blind tasting of some whiskeys and put our MGP in there, and we were like, "Fine, which one is your MGP?" And they couldn't do it. And I mean, and these were guys who knew what they were drinking,
right?
And they couldn't find it, and we were told, like, it's this one, and every one of them was like, "Oh, I wanted to say it was that one, but it was so not like anything I normally try. I was afraid to commit." And it's like, yeah, that's what Texas does to MGP. So we released them at cask strength, and we decided, yeah, $50 was fair. So here's cask strength, $50 bottle of whiskey, and it's fucking great because MGP makes great whiskey.
Right.
And we've been doing that now for like 3 years, and then we started doing the Alliance, and those are all single barrels. So we've been almost only a single barrel distillery. Like 95% of our releases single barrels since we started. Well, right now, because of the demand and the things that we're trying to figure out, we're going to try to scale, not everything, but some things, so that we can get at least something that we have a hand in to the people who want it. Well, that means we're going to have to walk away from the single barrel plan.
Right.
Because if I need to be able to send 2,000 bottles to, shared pour, or 2,000 bottles to distributor retail. And I'm not going to make it 10 single barrels because there's a consistency problem there. Right. So immediately we're about to have to figure out what is the best thing we can make that we're still proud of and we think still represents us, but that equals 2,000 bottles. And we're working on that. Emma's working on that blend right now.
Right.
But now when that goes out there, it's either going to have the first blend, as far as we can figure, is either going to have a base of this 14-year-old light whiskey that we got our hands on, or a base of this like 2-year-old corn whiskey, and then all these other flavor accent barrels to develop it. Now, imagine what it's going to be received as for people who don't like us when they find out that, though, we finally got a bottle, it's mostly light whiskey. I mean, immediately, we can just all hear it ringing from the hills. Oh, they sold out. They watered down the quality so that they could scale up. And it's like, no, I mean, we had to make some decisions to scale up. And we're still proud of this.
Right.
But we definitely had to make some choices.
So with this sort of general notion of we're all about quality, we're about the art, we're about the craft, we're about the business, so on and so forth. And I think you can look at some big brands that their focus is on mass market, bottom shelf or one shelf up, and they make their profit of quality over quantity. And maybe it's it's in the bar, it's going into cocktail, it's going into cocktail. That's the mindset of it. But I think it goes back to what you said when we first started, is what's their intent and what's the goal? What's the aim? What is this for? So the musician who puts out an album and he tours with, but he also, it just so happens, and people don't know it, he's also making jingles for commercials to bring him some money. He's not going to play those. You deserve a break today, or he's not going to play his jingles when he goes out on the road. That's not what he's proud of. But there is that. I know there is that struggle of this is what I want to make, but the mass consumers they're not into it.
Yeah.
And I need to make some money, and there's this tension. So one winery that I worked for, they did a Rhone blend of Viognier, Roussanne, and Marsanne white wines. I love the wine, and I thought it was a good price. Right. I really liked it. They got a big write-up in this Wall Street Journal. I went out there to congratulate them. They'd say how they're doing and so forth. And I tried the wine, and they changed it. They went from Viognier to Gewürztraminer and Riesling, which are all very, very floral. So lighter, very floral. And I was like, wait a minute, you had a traditional Rhone white blend that I loved. Why did you change it? And they said, because the buyers weren't in love with it. I said, but I liked it. And they go, well, they said, well, we got 400 cases we'll sell you.
Yeah. You're skinny into the bell curve, man. We can't cater to you. There's no money in it.
Exactly. And I kind of went, and I actually tried this other wine. It wasn't bad. It was okay. But they took 3 wines that were hyper floral, and on the nose were beautiful. But for me, they weren't the traditional Rhone style blend that I was used to, and that I really, really liked. But I understood the decision. And so He had the winemaker, his name is Marcus Nigley. He had the wines that he made that he liked, that were his prize, that were his children. And then there were the ones that he put out and sold that were what the mass consumer liked. But I think some people, when they see those other whiskeys, they sold their soul to the devil, or when a rock band that they liked puts out a song that's a little bit more commercial. They sold out to big business, and they get this negative dump on it.
I think the American large non-craft producers, I think, do a better job of this than most other countries as a generic thing. And I think what was very cool, like about Kentucky, for example, is that they've given themselves permission to make multiple things. Like, you almost never in these big ones find one distillery who gives 0 fucks about anything but mass product and money, right? So what they'll do is they'll go, okay, this line is for that, but the income from this line allows us to release this.
Okay, let me challenge that a little bit. Where do you think Macallan has gone on this? The general consensus is it's better on the nose than it is on the palate. Their commercials, I took one of the commercials and I changed the audio for it and made a joke out of it. It follows the model of Versace cologne commercial with a half-naked guy, and he jumps off a cliff and suddenly sprouts wings and all this kind of nonsense. So it doesn't tell you jack diddly about the whiskey. I changed it so he jumps off. I used the Volheimer scream, which is used in Star Wars films.
Yeah,
and he's and the whole time he's flying, he's going So I changed a little bit, but it's not. It didn't deliver on the palate what it has on the nose.
I agree with that.
And the price, the cost of Macallan is just boom. And and I feel bad because Macallan was my first love. My entry into whiskey was the Macallan 12.
Right.
But I have not done, other than the classic cut, which is a near cask strength, I have challenged as a connoisseur, or whatever term you want to use, of a whiskey enthusiast, recommending Macallan based on this. And if Macallan did what you just said, okay, here is the people who are into the glitz and the glam and the rings and the GQ magazines and lifestyle image, but here's our craft. and here's this
Right.
line we do for our craft people.
Right.
Then I would kind of go, but it seems to me, and I don't mean to pick on Macallan, but that's kind of, I think they've jumped the ship. I think
Well, okay.
Crossed the
I don't know, because I don't actually follow Macallan close enough, and I actually am not extremely familiar with Macallan. I mean, I am, and like, yes, I know Macallan, and I know the numbers and the things.
Well, they spent $360 million building a new distillery.
Yeah. So here's the thing: is the question is who is their market, and evidently it's not you, right? And who is their what is their goal? And if it is to just kind of take over everything, then yeah, that kind of marketing is exactly what I would have recommended for somebody who's moving in the direction it seems like they're moving.
Right.
Now, you as a connoisseur,
a nerd,
you have an AB memory, right? But if their goal is to reach people who don't consider themselves and are entering the world and want to spend and feel like they've spent money, which is a very specific category of humans with a lot of money,
right?
Then they're not going to know what they missed from 10 years ago.
Right. Well,
they have no idea.
There's a video that we recorded when I first visited you guys. What whiskey snobs don't want you to know, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And one of the things you had mentioned in there is that statistically, if you make it more expensive, people psychologically it resonates with people better, and then they like it more. And so
that's scientifically accurate. That's not a weird like manipulate. Like they literally, the pleasure center of their brain reacts more, so they are physically having a better time.
So the one
that's
thing,
how fragile our human brains are.
So one of the this is where I would like to bring in. I don't know what the goals are of Balcones or how big they want to go, how much out of Texas want to go. I mean, Balcones is a pretty wide distribution through Total Wine, pretty much around the country. A little bit more challenging to get, say, in Canada and so forth. But I would kind of like to have this discussion again, and bring them in and say,
yeah, me too.
And so, in bridging, how far do you want to go? How global, or we just want to hit all of the United States and a couple outside of our country, or how far do you want to go, and how do you maintain quality control and while producing quantity? What's your plan do you inch your way into that? So you can kind of slowly work your way up in there, so you don't lose control of it. Like, oh shit, we lost control of everything, and oh crap, we've gone too far. And then what's the model and what's the approach for doing that? I'd like to have this discussion again with them or anyone else on that. But then also, at what point, there's a point in all of us in terms of where we draw the line of quality versus quantity. Let's take for Whiskey Tuber, for example. There was a short time in which I was putting out 7 videos a week. I started feeling a little burnout.
Yeah.
And I could tell quality starts to dip. I then decided to, you know what, I'm going to study more on editing. We'll start watching more videos on editing. I'm going to reduce quantity and try to produce what I think is a better quality video. I don't feel burned out, and I enjoy it, because of course there's no money involved. I don't care about the money side of it. But there's a parallel there in terms of quantity versus quantity, that you can lose the grasp on the quality, because so much is just get it out. You go from a fine dining restaurant to a fast food restaurant.
Yeah, too quickly. It's called watering down the soup. There's 2 things on that I think are actually kind of key. I think every time we have a conversation, whiskey people have conversations like this about someone like Macallan, or somebody going, hey, we're going to drop our age statement on our bourbon. It's 12. Now it's, whatnot.
Well, now you just open a whole other can of worms.
Yeah. So, but the biggest problem is the people who live in the transition. Because, you outlast that, then you're whatever you became, right? So I think the biggest frustration is that somebody feels like they got betrayed. Because when you really buy into a brand and fall in love, and then they do something like that, there's a small sense of betrayal, of like, how dare you? You're not who I thought you were,
Right.
right?
It says you were a Metallica fan and they went disco.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, Jesus. Oh, I want to have that album so bad. But if they had simply started that way, right, with all intention, then you might love them for what they are. Does that make sense?
Right.
Is that what you dislike, is the memory of the early and the turn to something you don't agree with, and the betrayal in between? Now, I mean, there's not objectively, but there's a whole other thing about like, I don't think you're that great. You're priced twice as much as this other thing, and I think it's amazing, so I think you're overpriced. That's a whole other conversation. But I think fundamentally for somebody, that transition can feel like a betrayal, and you've got to be careful about that. And they almost always do a terrible job of that transition. And the other thing on that is,
particularly if investors get in and they start dictating things.
Yeah.
Now, if someone's an investor and they're hands off and they don't, hey, we like what you do, keep doing what you do. We're not going to tell you what to do because we like what you're doing. Then that's good. So actually, I know a winemaker up in near the Russian River, and his winery was out of a business park, and he's running his ass off because he's sourcing all his grapes. He doesn't have vineyard property. So he's running his ass off all of California, getting the best grapes he can, making the best wines he can. He grew up a fan base, a club. People loved his wine. Great stuff, great wines. And then Kendall Jackson, big company, says, we like what you're doing. We want to buy you out, but we want you to stay the winemaker. You keep doing what you're doing, and now you don't have to run around so much because we can source the grapes for you. And it was like the best of both worlds. His name stays on it. He's the winemaker. He's making the quality wines. He keeps the fans happy. And he doesn't have to run his ass off all over the place because as a big company, Kendall Jackson's huge. They can grab the grapes that he wants to make the wines that he wants. But that's a rarity.
That's what Grant does. William Grant and Sons.
Okay.
I've heard that's effectively what they do. Every time they've bought something in America, they've just gone, we bought you because we love you. Keep going.
Yep. You know? And that's really the best. If someone can swing that deal, then they haven't sold their soul to the devil. And it works out really, really well. Of course, they think lawyers get involved, getting the right contract, getting everything in writing, and a lot of my recommendation would be have a lot of dinners before you ever sign anything.
Yeah,
and a lot of conversations and get to know the family.
Never walk. That's always. I mean, that's true of any negotiation. Is never have a negotiation you can't walk away from, or else you're never going to come out ahead, or even. Right. If you can't say no, then you shouldn't be in that room because it's inevitable that you're going to get.
If you're that desperate, they will read it on your face. You can read desperation on someone's face in the business room. All right, so I want to bring up the slide real quick. Branding, marketing, commercials versus advertising, maximum quality, maximum profit without destroying the brand image, a suitable business versus expanding business model. We've kind of covered that a little bit. Appealing to the whiskey enthusiasts versus appealing to the mass consumers. We sort of touched on that, and that really good distilleries do both.
You know who does, I think, one of the best jobs on the planet of both is, Ardbeg does an amazing job, but so does, we've already talked about Ardbeg, so does Laphroaig. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Laphroaig took the negative comments and made it their brand. And
they own it.
I don't know whose job it was to plan that campaign and who said, guys, let's not chase easier drinking. Let's own Laphroaig. But they deserve every medal that there is because it's ballsy to do that when you're at that level of money and at that level of income, and at that level of need to stay employed and need to sell things. And it can be easy to be like, there's big money and accessible whiskey, mostly blends. Let's chase that a little, because we're too hard to drink. We're so aggressive. We're so Lafroig. We should like make it a little easier. And for somebody to say, no, 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 you just stay you. I just love that.
So I kind of, this is I suspect this is, whoever was doing that didn't go to marketing school at some university, some university.
No, yeah.
You get the basics.
Not in a university. Yeah.
And out of the box thinking, of the box thinking is really, 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 really important. And in terms of whiskey tubers, I love Roy. I think he's one of the biggest out of the box thinkers in terms of whiskey tubers.
Mm.
Who in the hell does whiskey reviews standing next to a recycling bin? I would have never thought of that. Yeah, I'm going to stand out next to the garage and stand next to a recycling bin, spin a bottle around, hold it up, and then throw it in the garbage. I never would have thought of doing it. I was like, well, that's that out of the box thinking. And I have to admit, I gravitate a little bit more towards licking my finger, which way's the wind blowing, and I'm going to see what works, what people are doing, and maybe put my own little spin on some things. Obviously, the level of nerdedom is a little different on mine. The geekdom, the willing to go a little more in depth to the point I'm going to lose some newbies. I'm willing to do that, but that kind of out of the box thinking to just go, who in the hell would think of doing that?
Right.
And be total originality and approaching to doing whiskey reviews. And he doesn't do them that often. He waits till he's done. He doesn't do one bottle, then one bottle, and one bottle. He waits till he's got, I don't know, 10, 15 bottles and then does them all in one video. And they do really, really well. But that's sort of out of the box thinking. But I think this little, whoever was the mind behind, when I go back to Isla, or if I can get a hold of Lafroig, who came up with that decision? Because that is really outside the box thinking.
Yeah, they need to have a statue of whoever that person is outside the front of Lafroig. I'd be like, who's that guy?
And the thing is, it's a risk. It's a risk because you don't know. My own perception of my own stuff, I think it's brilliant. I think it's smart, and the rest of the world goes, "No, that's freaking stupid." My own sense of humor. I'm always a little nervous with my humor because I never know how I'm gonna come across some people. So for example, you did this thing on one of your recent videos where you said, you Fizz Izzle or whatever, how you mispronounce it. And you said, this is how it's actually pronounced.
Yeah.
And then
Fizzy Izzle. Yeah.
Fizzy Izzle, right. And then I made a joke comment below. It's actually fish ale, and it's from these beer makers who would make their beer. And then you said touche. And I thought, I hope he doesn't believe me.
No.
I said, you can even look it up on Google or Wikipedia.
Yeah. No, it's perfect.
Yeah.
That's
but I said I'm always worried. Do people believe my bullshit? Because I'm just joking. I don't need people to believe on that. But
to think, a sign that glows in the background says, just joking.
Yes. But so I think, and I think because we've gotten to know each other a little bit, okay, Erik is just pulling one. But I think to think outside the box in marketing and how you're going to do things and be successful, and nobody's done it before. It's one of the things when I see it in wine, see it in music, see it in movie making, movie making. Whoever did the Witch Blair project, and I think it was $8,000 was their budget, and it did really, really well. That's like totally outside the box thinking in terms of how you do stuff. Most people, I hate to say this, and include myself, more people are imitators than originators. It's hard to be original.
Yeah. Because it takes a lot of taking it in the chin.
So I'm sorry, I got distracted by comments. I kind of want to focus on discussion and not and stay on topic. A lot of people ask questions that sort of go off on a rabbit trail.
I haven't seen the comments. Can you see the comments? It doesn't matter.
Anyway, so the whiskey enthusiasts versus the consumers. Now, so this is sort of a pros and cons thing, but I mean, let's get real. Who is paying the bills of families? It employs very few people. The craft contributed to a local economy versus employs many people, contributed to a national economy. Whatever you think about the big conglomerate brands, they are putting, a Gallo, for example, right? Huge. One of the biggest wine companies. They're in the Central Valley. I can't remember. My dad drank their shit. I don't like them. One time they put out a wine. It was a real high-end wine that got all these awards. They only did it just to prove they can. They weren't changing the business model. They just want to say, what? If we want to, we can do high-quality wines, get high ratings. We can do it.
Right.
Here's the proof. Boom. And that was it. They went back to it. Now we're going to go back to, so if you were to see the tanks, their fermentation tanks, it's hard. You ever see those big oil rig things on the side of the road?
Yeah.
That's how big they're. Freaking huge.
You probably fit our entire tasting room inside of them.
No. Half the property of where you're at. They're huge.
That's amazing.
They're huge, and they have their own bottle. They make their own glass. They have their own bottle. They don't just buy bottles. They bottle their stuff, but. They're also a huge supporter. They're very family focused, good medical programs, good medical plans, good retirement plans.
Yeah.
So they really support all their employees. But if you meet if you're a wine snob such as myself, and you meet someone, oh, you're in the wine business. Who do you work for? Gallo. The expression on my face is going to be, oh.
I know, isn't it true though? I mean, so many of the Scottish distilleries, even the Macallans, like there's one of the only real forms of employment in the area where the distillery is.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So one of the things, to give them their due, to give the big boys their due, is they are employing more families. They're a bigger contributor, maybe even an international economy, as well as a local economy. They're really, really the backbone of a lot of people being able to put a roof over their head, put diapers on their kids, and pay the bills. Whereas a small local distillery, it may be just Mary and Sue and one other person running the distillery.
Right.
So they don't really employ. They don't employ a lot of people. They can't employ a lot of people. And so, in terms of on a bigger scale, in terms of who they're supporting and contributing to the economy, they're not that big of a player. And unfortunately, and you guys have been seeing this since this COVID, consequently, they don't have as big a political clout.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about that. I'm a little sensitive. I'm a little bitter. It's too soon, Erik. It's too soon. The session just ended.
I know. So one of the lesser known outside whereas global image, and this sort of ties into the next point, which is advances creativity, craftsmanship, and experimentation. However, I would respond that if you visit large distilleries, I can talk about this in a second, versus the other one advances the image of whiskey, forwarding to the reputation of a desirable spirit.
Yeah.
This is a perception, not necessarily reality. So one of the things that I found surprising when I was visiting distilleries in Scotland, for example, Glengoyne, here's all the standard casks and stuff that everybody hears of and knows of that are going to go into the bottlings. And you go on the back and here's this, they have one with maybe Calvados. Wait. That's not legal. Yeah. You can't age in Calvados. Mezcal. Now it's legal. It's since June 2019. It wasn't legal then. Wait. Right. How can you be? Because people think, because it is true, the small guys, because you're only, we screwed up a batch. Okay. It's a very small amount. We didn't make, 50,000 bottles and it turned up bad. We only made a small amount, so we can. Just like you guys are very experimental, so
Right.
we can. If you're doing things in small proportions, you can. In some sense, you can experiment more because if it goes awry, that's all right. And you have a small fan base; they're gonna even drink your weird shit.
Mm-hmm.
But and what people don't realize is the big boys are experimenting stuff, and even though some of the stuff is not legal yet, the day that becomes legal through the SWA, all of a sudden,
Bam, bam,
whoa!
bam, bam, bam.
How in the hell? For example, where is it?
Like that Dewar's Mezcal is one of the more
Yes,
interesting.
that's
Yes,
that's exactly what I'm thinking of.
I can't really say I like it, but I can't stop drinking it because it's such a mind trip.
Yeah,
I keep wanting to remember what it was. It's like, this is so weird.
I put on my thumbnail my guilty pleasure.
Yeah,
You're not supposed to like it, but you do.
Yeah,
and
yeah. Rex never blown away by that at Middleton, right? You won't find a bigger big brand than Middleton as a distillery, right? They're making
yes, the biggest,
90% of what's in Ireland, but they had invested in an internal experimental distillery on the property. They had 2 craft size pot stills that are like 1,000 liters or something like that, and they were doing all these like super weird grain mixes and fermentation testing, and I mean they were innovating and creating as aggressively as any craft person I've ever met in my entire life, experimenting at every level and weird barrels and weird everything at every step of the process. But they are smart enough to know they can't release that as the next Jameson.
Right.
So what did they do? They created a whole new brand line called Method and Madness.
Oh, yeah.
And the Method and Madness is the craft distillery inside of Middleton, right? So just because you're big does not mean you don't care about creativity or innovation or research.
Right. In fact, so there's 2 major universities in California and I'm always bringing up wine. There's UC Davis, and then there is Fresno State. Fresno State has their own bonded winery. They grow the grapes. And so you can learn how to make. It's more of the hands-on learn how to make wine, and they actually produce wine there. UC Davis is more of the nerdy research side. And they are funded, particularly by the Mondavi family, by the big boys. It's the big boys who are gifting money to UC Davis to do the research that we then benefit from the wine. And it's the same thing in the whiskey world. Is maybe these big boy distilleries, let's say Johnny Walker, are not. They don't advertise that they're doing this stuff. They're doing the stuff behind the scenes. And it may be years to actually see. It may never come around, but it may come around when things become more legal, or they may, like you just said, put out some other sort of side brand and then bottle it that way.
Right.
But the big boys, and I'm not apologist for craft. I'm not apologist for the big boys, a big business. But they have their strengths. They have their weaknesses. This is life. They have their pros. They have their cons. I try to look at everything like that. Multiple perspectives, pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses. Just deal with people that way, deal with business that way, deal with everything that way. Is realizes if it wasn't for them, a lot of research wouldn't be going on. Yeah. They're the money behind it. And my next point on that was, who is making whiskey known in South America? Who's making it known in Australia? Who's making it known in New Zealand, Japan?
They're really carving the headwinds.
Russia,
to even
Romania.
Leave the room.
Right. Yeah. It's the big boys who are putting it in the airports. They have the commercials that are if you watch a movie, I love doing this. You watch a movie and there's a scene going on and they're in a bar scene and there's all these bottles. And I don't, maybe I don't do it the first time I watch the movie, but when I rewatch the movie, how many can I name that are on the shelf in the back in the bar? Pause it. Oh, they got there's a Jack Daniels, there's a Jameson, there's a Johnny Walker. Oh, there's a the Macallan, there's a whatever. Yeah, I like doing that. Just see how many you can name just by the image is this big in the back, but because they've labeled it, they have a classic labeling that you recognize. I like to be able to go through and name them all.
Right.
But who is, to use Roy's term, evangelizing whiskey on a global scale so that people in, if there were people in Antarctica, or people on other planets eventually, if Elon Musk gets us to go intergalactic, now who's going to evangelize whiskey to the Martians or whatever? Yeah. It's gonna be the big boys. It's gonna be the big boy because my theory. I think aliens actually crashed on Orkney, and they had whiskey as a fuel for their UFO, and that's actually how the whiskey got started. People started like to drink the fuel from the UFO. Anyway,
who doesn't? Yeah,
I haven't had anything to drink, so but they're the ones who get the name recognition, who get the name out there, who evangelize, and people are going to start off with those global 100,000 case brands that they can get at any hotel, that they can get on the airplane.
Dude, that was my entry to whiskey.
Exactly.
It was Jameson, right?
Exactly.
So that was all I drank for years, like 21 to like 22, 23. That was it.
So Christopher Moore just dropped a $5, and if anybody else dropped money and I didn't notice, I apologize. Been so focused on the conversation here, but every time a Glencairn rings, although this isn't a Glencairn, an angel gets its wings. There you go. That's my line.
How do you see that? Like, do you have something that pops up on your end that tells
you?
So
I have
money?
So there's two chats. I have the one up from YouTube up, and then there's the one from StreamYard, which I don't really like. And so it lights up. And so I have one eye on it, and I
cool.
kind of want to keep the conversation flowing. It's very easy to get off on tangents and whatever else. So people have been asking some great questions, and I want to apologize if you've asked a really good question and I didn't catch it. I know Richie Z, who's a local, he asked a really good question.
Because you're a bad person.
Well, he asked I know that, but he asked a really good question earlier, but because it wasn't germane to the topic, I didn't want to get off into. He asked us about, do we have any favorite whiskeys thus far in 2021? Which is a good question, but it's not germane to the topic at hand.
Yeah, I don't yet. I should say, let me say this. I don't have any that have kicked out my normal favorites.
Right.
That have supplanted an existing favorite. Yeah.
I would have to give it more thought. And usually I don't even think in those categories until the end of November. Because at the end of the year, I do a top 10 for 2020. And I have to go through all my videos. I did like a 3 or 4 month study on Irish whiskey this year. And it would probably something out of Ireland that has really stuck in my mind. Probably the Leo Verbalton from the Green Spot. It sticks to my mind. But anyway.
Oh, yeah. That's their the famous vineyard that, yeah.
So Mike Bennett says, everyone wants to know what cigar Daniel is smoking.
Oh. Where's the tag? Here you go. I took it off the cigar a second ago. Can you? I can't find my camera.
Hold on, let me see if I can bring it. Let me see if I can bring it in. Nope.
Serie P, number 2.
There you go. No, hold on.
Artigas Habana.
Okay. There you go. I'm asthmatic, so in fact, I had like 3 or 4 weeks of pneumonia recently, and then they put me back on my asthma medicines. They put me up through a bunch of antibiotics.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can't. Even if I like smoking, I couldn't do it. Anyway, all right. See, we got derailed. I want to get back on track. So we sort of covered everything I had on the list, and we could talk for days on this. But if you watch this on the replay, and you go back and watch this again, there's been pros and cons and strengths and weaknesses to both craft or small producers and big producers. There's been dangers of both, the directions and things that can happen to both of them. And I think as a whiskey reviewer, tuber, educator, I think the best thing we can do is, as much as possible, I find there's a lot of sort of like parables of whiskey that apply to people. I don't judge a whiskey by neck pour. But you guys recently did an excellent video on the tribe.
The whole time I did that
pour.
was the whole time I was thinking about you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because the whole time I was trying to think of like how many things can I say to just like poke at Erik and give him shit. And it was my own little personal joke the whole time. Like, I don't think anybody knew I was doing it.
Okay.
But I tried to, I watched your video a couple times. You talked in that neck pour, and so I was trying to remember things you had said, and then been like, well, if you say this, then you obviously don't know what you're talking about. And I forgot to text you and let you know I was hassling you because I've been so busy. But
I thought it was really, really I was a little concerned that you guys would say anybody who says the neck pour is any different than anything else is full of shit. I was a little concerned that would be your conclusion. I'm like, oh crap, now I got to disagreement with you guys. But you think about it in terms of how you deal. There are some people you meet right away. Wow, this person's really, really nice, they're really awesome, and you start to hang out with them, and you realize it's a veneer, they're fake, and it's bullshit, and they're a manipulator, and all that other stuff, right? And there's some people, maybe you just met them on a bad day. They didn't have enough coffee. They're going through something and they rub you the wrong way. But then you hang out with them and you realize, oh, wow, this is actually a cool person. Maybe I caught them on off day, or they just have a different sense of humor that I have, But I think I'm
trying to think of a whiskey that I really hated and then learned to love.
The 410 comes to my mind.
As a category, I got bored by Speyside.
Oh.
But then, because I just fell in love with all the smoky shit, right? It's like a beer guy diving into hops. But then I took a break for a couple of weeks, and I came back, and I was doing something where it was just, I had to drink like 15 Speysides. And at the end of it, I realized, man, I've not been fair. I need to go back to this and judge it on its own merits. It's not trying to compete with Ardbeg or Laphroaig or Lagavulin. It's trying to be what it is. And I need to judge the whiskey on what it's intending to be, not anything other than that. And when I came down into space, I just lived in it for a while. I started opening into all of these nuances and subtleties and real differences, and kind of fell in love with it again. It didn't become my top preference, but but it's still, I appreciate it.
I did like 3 or 4 months of just Highland peated whiskeys. That and everything I've done that has changed my perception of things. That radically changed my perception of it. One, there's a lot more than what I realized. Two, it's a lot more difficult to distinguish between Islay and some of them, like Old Baltruan, like the Old Baltruan between Islay. It's not so things aren't clear cut, but a lot of them are absolutely fantastic, and not the made by not do Enoch, the Enoch.
The cutter,
is really nice.
It makes you wish that there was more peated Highlands when you realize how good they are at it.
And the funny thing is, if you go visit the distilleries, they have a lot of them will have them at the distillery that have no distribution. You can only get them there, and you realize there's a lot.
Our video this morning that came out, we shot like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Dave Allardyce, the brand rep for
Glenfiddich. Yeah, I saw that. Actually, I watched. It's funny. His name's Allardyce, and he's not working for Glendronach, which is founded by Allardyce.
No, he brought us a peated Glenfiddich, and it was so good.
I know. I was like, oh, dude, I want that.
He left that bottle with me, so when you come back to the vault, you'll get to try it.
Yes. Because I was like, oh, dude, I so much want to try that.
I'm putting it in the locked cabinet for you guys.
There you go. All right, awesome, man. Just keep anywhere where Rex can't get to it. That's the important thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I think I watched that this morning. Yeah, excellent video. So, but I think one of the takeaways from tonight's discussion is there's pros and cons. There's weaknesses and strengths. There are things we have to be thankful for the big guys. There are things we have to be thankful for the little guys. There are struggles that I think both have, and while we don't have to applaud everything that they do, we don't have to be a yes man and just say, "Oh, it's all good." We can be critical where
You can acknowledge that your friends might have some flaws.
Right. Yes, but it's the same way in which we deal with people. Is I did this video which it was 10 whiskey tubers for newbies who I recommend watching. And these people, I think, except for Ralphie, I've met everybody. I consider everybody friends, and yet every one of them does stuff that I don't agree with, or occasionally rubs me the wrong way. But I mean, but they're not as bad as the people you might have over for Thanksgiving.
Yep.
Sometimes some of our friends are better than our relatives.
It's the family you choose.
Yes, exactly. So we're coming up on an hour and a half. So I'm just going to wind things down here. So if people haven't liked already, please give it a like. We're watching on the replay. If you guys have any questions in the last few minutes, if you guys have any specific questions for Daniel or for myself, now's the time to drop them. Now we've kind of covered everything I wanted to discuss. Drop a question right now. And if you're watching on the replay, drop a question and we'll try to get to it on the replay. So, hey, Daniel, I really want to thank you for coming on.
Thanks for the invitation.
Perspective.
I wish you and I could hang out more. I wish I could convince you that Texas would be a good place to move.
Hey, I've had interviews, and I've tried actually with the University of Texas. Yeah, in Austin, and there's a campus there in Austin, but it just didn't work out.
That's the campus in Austin.
Yeah. So I'm always looking at maybe when I retire or something like that. But
hey, we're hiring a bar back at the distillery,
dude. Unless you can pay me $200K, it ain't happening.
I could pay you in 200,000 somethings. We'll come up with what it is later.
But I think Austin. I still have scars on my legs and arms from because I wasn't catching them. All right. So Jim Morris says, let me see if I can get here in the chat and there we go. Kind of. So Jim Morris. Let's see. Hey, Eric. Oops, wrong one. Sorry. The thing moves, and when you click it, okay. Can you ask Daniel if Texas by statute regulator defined Texas whiskey as its own category and how statutory regulations affects the quality or production? Great question.
Okay, so first, no, we don't have one to define Texas whiskey, although we would like one. But two, the Whiskey Association has been very aggressive about how whatever we define Texas whiskey as can't get too heavy-handed, because the opposite of what we want is stifled creativity. And so our goal is that the definition of Texas whiskey doesn't have anything like Tennessee, where it's like you got to charcoal filter it, but instead just simply says, make it here, age it here, bottle it here. That's it. Make it here, age it here, bottle it here.
So, and I'm hoping, are you following what's going on with Japan at the moment?
Well, and that's why we keep telling our people is like our worst nightmare. Texas right now is growing as a category, and it's getting more and more famous and more talked about and more discussed. The worst thing that could ever happen to us is, as our distilleries keep winning best in the world at everything, that we lose touch of what Texas whiskey is, and people start to discover that this one thing is that's their favorite thing in the whole planet isn't actually Texas whiskey. And to recover from that would take us decades, and you're watching it happen in Japan. Right. Japan went from the highest mountain to a collapse of consumer confidence. Right. And that's the greatest fear of the Texas Whiskey Association, is that we don't ever want that to happen. And so that's the only thing we're trying to protect. Not what it tastes like, not how you make it, not what you do, not what you produce, not what you bottle, not what you blend. We just want it to be made here.
Right,
That's it.
right. So for those who know, in a nutshell, so Japan, they've been making whiskey since the early 1900s, but their mentality was more for local. Obviously, we had a war going on, the Second World War. That's how Mizunara cask came into vogue because they couldn't get American cask and so on and so forth. So the whiskey was produced for the Japanese. Is made stylistic for them. When the next generation goes, that was our parents' drink. We don't want to drink that. The consequence is the market plummeted. People weren't buying it. Consequently, distilleries closed. Then they got a big write up in Jim Murray's Whiskey Bible. There was a movie made about Masataka Takatsuru.
And then a TV series.
Yes, a TV series. Hey, someone should give me like a bonus prize for being able to pronounce that correctly. And so all of a sudden, boom, huge demand, age statements, everything. Man, it was just supply just went. The result is Japanese whiskey was Scottish, it was Canadian, it was American being blended in, and because they had no regulations, you were now buying Japanese whiskey that wasn't really Japanese whiskey. Now, the main thing about Japanese whiskey is the artisanship of the blend and the artisanship of how they blend things, not necessarily just water source or grain source or something like that, but they've been running fast and loose for far too long as to what was quote unquote Japanese whiskey, and they're just now starting to come around because the result is people started going.
Even like non-whiskey nerds have started shitting on Japanese whiskey.
Yeah,
like I couldn't. Like I was at a bar the other day and there was a guy who didn't even drink whiskey and he was like a typical like shots guy. And somebody else was like, I want to try a Japanese whiskey. And he was like, oh, that fucking shit ain't even Japanese. I was like, how did he know that?
And they can take, they could change everything in terms of production. It could take a generation to change the image. I did this weird thing years and years and years back in Austria. Someone was using glycol in the wine. Glycol is an alcohol used they put it in your jackets for cooling the fermentation tanks, or you put it in your radiator in your automobile. And but it had a little sweetness, and they put it. And the result is Austrian wine. They get the reputation of Austrian wine, and it was just one winery. And it took generations for people to get over. Holy shit! There's freaking glycol in it. People wrote off the entire industry. Well, that same sort of thing is in Texas. Smart and Spencer Weiland, who's head of the Texas Whiskey Association, correct?
Well, he was. He's not anymore.
Okay. I didn't have Spence on. I haven't talked to him in a while. But you want to safeguard Texas for that very reason. All right. So got another question real quick. Christopher Moyes, I apologize for not getting this earlier. Dropped a $5. Thank you very much, sir. Scotch is dying in New York City. I can't find half of what I'd like.
Wait, so Christopher, I'm assuming Christopher's still in the comments. Do you mean it's dying as in it's not as accessible, or people aren't ordering it as much? That's my question.
So so Christopher Moy is a regular. So Christopher Moy, if you can clarify on that. Well, one, where is the economy of New York in this COVID era, and how big have they hit? People are bugging out of New York, and so the restaurants are closing. So they've got hold everything. But one of the things I noticed about New York is if I'm looking for a particular bottle that's a new release, Ardbeg, for whatever reason they hit New York first. They hit Germany and Holland and Netherlands, and then New York. And I don't know why they show first. So I tend to ping retailers in New York when I'm looking for the stuff. Okay, I got one from Dirty Dog. Let me bring that one up real quick. Navigating through all this stuff is trying to find it. Where'd Dirty go? There you go. Hey, Daniel, is the Whiskey Academy back open yet?
It's about to be. We're going to hold a level 1 in July and 1 or 2 in August. So far, attendance is light. Up until COVID, every class sold out that we ever held. Months and months before. I think right now everyone's still a little gun shy about traveling. Like we have a list of like 15 Canadians who want to come to the class, but aren't sure that if they do, they can go back home.
Right.
So
yeah, I have a friend who's been
yes.
stuck in. I have a friend who's been stuck in Mexico for over a year.
Yeah, no, yes, it is, and we're about to start holding classes again. Yes, is the answer. Yes.
So, and I'm hoping to do the level. So next year, I have two. I'm in May. I'm hoping to be in back in Scotland, and specifically in Inverness, and take the level 3 through the Council of Whiskey Masters. Take the level 3 exam, which will be done with Charlie McLean.
Oh, come on, that's awesome.
Yeah. So you have I think you have written, oral, and then a blind tasting. So I'm hoping to do it in May. But also, depending on how you guys' schedule work out, find a time to get back to do the level 2 down there in Texas. So Ed Dog, you already answered what kind of. Okay. By the way, if you have more questions about the school, feel free to check out the website, send them an email, and you'll probably hear back. and you hear back pretty soon if you have more questions. Are there any restrictions on attending? To attending Colorado is on a modified restrictions and should be open shortly.
You mean restrictions on like how many people can attend? Okay, so instead of
he's
waiting
probably
for
asking if you have to have your shots.
You have to be vaccinated.
Yeah.
Come 2022, we're not going to require it anymore.
Okay.
Oh,
so very weird times we're living in, man. It's been a crazy time, and it's it's been political, it's been emotional, it's been business, it's hitting people at all levels, and I'm hoping, Lord willing, that we're now seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and things are going to get better. And I'm hoping I'll see you October 17th. I'll be down there, so I'll look forward to see you guys.
Yeah.
So, alrighty. So, hey, we're past the 1.5 hour mark. I want to thank everyone for watching. Daniel, hang on. We'll chat a little bit offline. And thank you very much for having on. Hopefully, you've not been eaten alive by your Texas mosquitoes.
I'm still here.
So, is there anything you got to take, vitamins or something that you spray yourself?
So here's the funny thing: I kill them out of habit, but I don't react to mosquitoes. My skin doesn't react to mosquitoes. I can watch them bite me, kill them, and then nothing happens.
Yeah, man, they love me, man. Erik is sweet meat, so
they bite me and they fly off and die.
No, they eat me alive, man. They eat me alive. So, all right, hey, I want to thank everyone for tuning in, for watching. Next Friday, 5 o'clock, we'll be back here. And if you guys have any questions afterwards, leave them down below and on the replay, and we'll try to get to them. All right, till next time. Hey, cheers, man. Thanks.